The compound sat like a cancer in the North African desert, surrounded by walls that had witnessed too much death. At 0300 hours under a moonless sky that promised nothing but darkness and blood, Lieutenant Commander Kara Brennan pressed her eye against the Schmidt and Bender scope of her Barrett M82 sniper rifle. The crosshairs settled on a figure 850 yards distant, a sentry who had no idea these would be his final moments on Earth. 72 hours before everything changed. 72 hours before a bar fight would make her famous for all the wrong reasons. But right now, in this moment, Kara Brennan was doing what she did best, being a ghost that delivered death. Her spotter, Petty Officer Second Class Tommy Reeves, whispered into the radio. His voice barely disturbed the night air. Wind 3 knots east. Range confirmed 850. Target stationary. You are green. Kara's finger caressed the trigger with the practiced ease of a woman who had done this dance before. In Kandahar, in Baghdad, in places that didn't exist on any official map. Her breathing slowed, her heartbeat steadied, and the world narrowed to that single point where physics and violence intersected. The Barrett spoke once, a thunderclap that rolled across the desert sand. The sentry dropped like a puppet with cut strings. Target down, Reeves confirmed. Compound breach team, you are clear to advance. 4 SEALs materialized from the darkness, moving with the fluid precision of men who had trained together for years. Kara watched through her scope as they approached the compound walls, their M4A1 carbines equipped with suppressors that turned gunfire into whispers. This was SEAL Team Sierra, and they were about to do what they did best, pull American citizens out of the jaws of hell. The breaching charge detonated with a muffled thump. Smoke and dust billowed through the opening. The team flowed through like water, deadly and unstoppable. Kara adjusted her scope, scanning for additional threats. Her ribs ached where the Kevlar vest pressed against bruises from their insertion jump 12 hours earlier. She had been operating in hostile territory for 3 weeks straight, and her body carried the accumulated weight of every mission, every firefight, every close call that separated the living from the dead. Through her night vision optics, she watched the clear rooms with practiced efficiency. Flashbang grenades turned the interior into a strobe light nightmare. Muzzle flashes created brief moments of illumination in the green-tinted darkness. Then the radio crackled with words that changed everything. Sierra Actual, this is Sierra 2. We have 16 hostages secured. Repeat, 16 hostages. But we have 2 civilian contractors KIA, executed before we arrived. And we have 1 critically wounded Marine colonel with arterial bleeding. He needs immediate exfil or he dies in the next 10 minutes. Kara's jaw tightened. 2 contractors dead. 2 Americans who had served their country in dangerous places, now reduced to body bags and notifications to families who would never fully understand why their loved ones had died in a compound that officially didn't exist. Sierra 2, this is Overwatch, Kara transmitted. Get that colonel stabilized. Exfil bird is 8 minutes out. You need to move now. She watched through her scope as the SEALs emerged from the compound carrying and supporting the hostages. Among them being carried in a fireman's hold by the team's medic was an unconscious Marine colonel whose uniform was soaked black with blood. That was when the enemy responded. Muzzle flashes erupted from a building Kara had cleared as secure just minutes earlier. The distinctive crack of AK-47 fire echoed across the compound. Rounds kicked up sand around the escaping Americans, and Kara heard someone scream over the radio. Her world narrowed to the scope. First target, a fighter leaning out a window, AK raised. Kara fired. The Barrett's recoil slammed into her shoulder as a 661 grain projectile crossed 900 yards in under 2 seconds. The fighter's head snapped back, and he disappeared into the building's darkness. Overwatch has your back, she transmitted, already acquiring her next target. Keep moving to the LZ. Second target, another fighter attempting to flank the team from a rooftop position. Kara led him by 3 feet, accounting for his movement and the wind drift. Fired. The fighter tumbled off the roof. But more were coming. The compound had been a hornet's nest, and the SEALs had just kicked it hard. Sierra Actual, this is Sierra 2. The colonel is crashing. Femoral artery is severed. He's got maybe 5 minutes. Kara made a decision that would change the trajectory of her life, though she didn't know it yet. She grabbed her M4A1 carbine and spoke into the radio. Sierra 2, I'm coming to you. Overwatch is mobile. Reeves grabbed her arm, his eyes wide in the green glow of night vision. Ghost your our eyes. Without Overwatch, the team is exposed. Kara pulled her arm free, already moving. The team needs that colonel alive more than they need me picking off stragglers. You take Overwatch. I'm going in. She covered the 850 yards in 4 minutes, her lungs burning, her legs pumping, her wounded ribs screaming with every breath. The weight of her gear, 60 pounds of weapons, ammunition, body armor, and survival equipment, threatened to drag her down into the sand. But Kara Brennan had not survived Bodun's. Hell Week had not endured 3 combat deployments, had not carried her father's legacy for 32 years to fail when Americans were dying. She reached the extraction point just as the colonel's medic looked up with desperation in his eyes. His pressure is dropping. I can't get the bleeder clamped. If we move him, he dies. If we stay here, we all die. Kara dropped to her knees beside the unconscious Marine. His face was pale, his breathing shallow. A name tape on his uniform read Bridger. Colonel James Bridger, though Kara didn't register the name in that moment. He was just another American who needed to get home. She pulled a field tourniquet from her kit, the kind that special operations medics carried for worst-case scenarios. Her hands moved with the practiced precision of someone who had been trained by the best combat medics in the world. Colonel Ann Hayes had personally taught Kara advanced tactical medicine during a classified training course 3 years earlier, and those lessons were about to save a man's life. Hold his leg steady, Kara ordered. Her voice cut through the chaos with the authority of someone who expected to be obeyed. I need 30 seconds. She located the femoral artery by feel her fingers pressing into the colonel's inner thigh. Blood pulsed against her palm with a rhythm that was growing weaker. She positioned the tourniquet 2 inches above the wound and cranked the windlass with controlled force. 1 turn, 2 turns, 3 turns. The pulsing stopped. The bleeding slowed to a seep. He's stabilized, Kara announced, but we need to move now. That tourniquet buys us maybe 30 minutes before we risk losing the leg. That was when the enemy made their final push. 4 fighters emerged from the compound's rear entrance, weapons raised screaming in Arabic. Kara didn't hesitate. She brought her M4A1 up in a single fluid motion, the weapon an extension of her body. The holographic sight settled on the first target. She fired twice. Center mass. The fighter dropped. The second fighter was already adjusting his aim toward the hostages. Kara fired 3 rounds. Headshot. He collapsed like a building with his foundation removed. But the third and fourth fighters were smarter. They had spread out using cover moving tactically. Kara saw the problem immediately. She couldn't engage both simultaneously while the team was exposed. Sierra team, get those hostages moving, she shouted. I'll cover. The SEALs didn't need to be told twice. They grabbed the colonel supporting the other hostages and began moving toward the landing zone where the extraction helicopter was inbound, its rotors already audible in the distance. Kara positioned herself between the enemy and her team. She fired controlled bursts, forcing the fighters to take cover. But they were closing the distance, and she was one operator against multiple targets. That was when she felt a sharp burning sensation across her ribs. Not a direct hit, the Kevlar had saved her from that, but shrapnel from a round that had fragmented against a rock near her position. She felt warm blood spreading across her side, soaking into her uniform. Pain is just information, she thought, remembering her father's words. Information that says you're still alive. Use it. She dropped 1 fighter with a headshot at 50 yards, her aim unwavering despite the wound. The final fighter broke and ran, disappearing into the darkness. Kara didn't pursue. Her mission was extraction, not revenge. Overwatch, this is Ghost, she transmitted, breathing hard. All enemy combatants neutralized or dispersed. Moving to LZ now. The helicopter landed in a storm of sand and noise. Kara helped load the colonel first, then the other hostages. She was the last one aboard, pulling herself up as the bird lifted off. Below them, the compound receded into the darkness, just another secret location where American warriors had written another chapter in an endless war. As the adrenaline faded, Kara finally allowed herself to assess her injury. The shrapnel had gouged a 4-inch laceration across her ribs, deep enough to need stitches, but not deep enough to compromise her ability to function. The team's medic, a grizzled senior chief named Martinez, examined the wound with a flashlight. 18 stitches minimum, he announced over the helicopter's roar. You're lucky it didn't go deeper. Kara watched as he began field stitching the wound using techniques that would leave a scar but would keep her operational. Across from her, Colonel Bridger remained unconscious, his face pale in the red glow of the helicopter's interior lighting. A medic monitored his vitals, adjusting IV drips, ensuring the tourniquet remained effective. For just a moment, maybe 30 seconds, the colonel's eyes fluttered open. He looked directly at Kara, his gaze unfocused but somehow aware. His lips moved, forming words she couldn't hear over the helicopter's noise. Then the morphine pulled him back under, and he was gone again. Kara didn't think much of that moment. She had seen dozens of wounded operators drift in and out of consciousness during medical evacuations. It was just another mission, just another save, just another night in a career built on doing the impossible in impossible circumstances. She had no way of knowing that in 72 hours that unconscious Marine colonel would walk into a bar and change everything. The Iron Anchor sat 3 blocks off base in Virginia Beach, a weathered establishment that catered to military personnel who wanted to drink somewhere that understood the unspoken rules. No loud music, no questions about deployments, no thank you for your service platitudes from civilians who couldn't begin to understand what service actually meant. It was Friday night, exactly 72 hours since North Africa, and Lieutenant Commander Kara Brennan wanted nothing more than to be left alone with her whiskey and her ghosts. She had showered for 40 minutes, standing underwater hot enough to turn her skin red, trying to wash away the compound's dust and the memory of 2 contractors who had died before SEAL Team Sierra could reach them. Their faces haunted her, not because she had known them, she hadn't, but because she had arrived too late to save them. In special operations, success was measured in lives saved, but failure was measured in lives lost. And no matter how many times commanders told her that some people couldn't be saved, that the mission had been a success, that 16 hostages rescued far outweighed 2 contractors killed, Kara couldn't shake the weight of those 2 body bags being loaded onto the transport plane. She had chosen the corner booth at the Iron Anchor with the practiced instinct of someone whose survival depended on awareness. Back to the wall, clear line of sight to the entrance, secondary exit route through the kitchen mapped in her mind. These weren't conscious thoughts anymore. They were reflexes hardwired by years of operating in environments where a moment's inattention meant death. The bar's interior was exactly what she needed. Dim lighting, dark wood, and the comfortable mustiness of a place that had absorbed decades of stories from men and women who served. Photographs lined the walls, ships from the Second World War, aircraft carriers from Korea, submarines from the Cold War era. This was a place that understood history and honored it quietly. Master Chief Marcus Oldfield worked behind the bar with the efficient movements of a man who had spent more years in the Navy than most people spent in their entire careers. He was 65 years old with hair that had gone from black to steel gray and hands that still bore the calluses of working on ship engines during the Korean War. He had served from 1952 to 1954, back when the Navy was still transitioning from the Second World War's massive fleet to the leaner, more technologically advanced force that would face down the Soviet Union. Oldfield had known Kara's father, Command Sergeant Major Patrick Brennan, back in the early 1950s. They had crossed paths during joint operations training, and they had maintained a friendship that lasted until Patrick's death from cancer 5 years earlier. When Kara first walked into the Iron Anchor 3 years ago, Oldfield had recognized her immediately. She had her father's eyes, the same intense blue that seemed to look straight through bullshit and see the truth underneath. He placed a whiskey neat in front of her without asking what she wanted. Kara had been drinking the same thing every Friday she was stateside, Maker's Mark, 2 fingers, no ice. It was her father's drink, and it connected her to memories of better times, when the old man would sit on their back porch and tell stories about Korea, about Audie Murphy, about what it meant to be a warrior in a world that didn't always appreciate warriors. "Rough week?" Oldfield asked, his voice pitched just loud enough to be heard over the bar's background noise, but not loud enough to intrude. Kara took a sip of the whiskey, letting it burn down her throat before answering. 72 hours ago, I was somewhere I can't talk about, doing something I can't describe, with people whose names I can't mention. 2 Americans came home in body bags. 16 came home breathing. You tell me if that's a rough week or a good week." Oldfield nodded slowly. He understood the mathematics of military service, the impossible calculus of weighing lives saved against lives lost. "Your father used to say the same thing after missions," Oldfield replied. "He'd sit right where you're sitting and drink the same whiskey. Said it helped him remember that he was still human, not just a weapon the government pointed at problems. Kara smiled slightly, though there was no humor in it. Did it work? Oldfield shrugged. He kept coming back every Friday, so I guess it helped. Or maybe he just liked the company of people who didn't ask stupid questions. The bar had perhaps 20 patrons scattered throughout, mostly older veterans, judging by their bearing and the way they carried themselves. These were men who had served in different eras, some from the Cold War, others from Desert Storm, a few from the early days of the War on Terror. They came to the Iron Anchor because it was a place where they didn't have to explain themselves, where their service was understood without needing to be discussed. In the far corner, barely visible in the dim lighting, sat an elderly African-American woman nursing a gin and tonic. She was dressed in civilian clothes, dark slacks, a simple blouse, reading glasses perched on her nose, as she reviewed what appeared to be a technical manual. Most patrons wouldn't give her a second glance, but Kara recognized her immediately. Colonel Margaret Holloway, United States Air Force retired. 77 years old, though she carried herself with the upright posture of someone decades younger. She had been one of the first black female pilots in the U.S. military, flying U-2 reconnaissance missions over the Soviet Union during the height of the Cold War. Between 1975 and 1989, she had completed 127 high-altitude missions, photographing Soviet military installations, tracking troop movements, and gathering intelligence that helped shape American strategic policy. After her flying career ended, Colonel Holloway had transitioned into training development, specifically psychological resilience protocols for Special Operations Forces. She had been one of the guest instructors during Kara's Buds training, brought in to teach candidates how to maintain mental clarity under extreme stress. Kara remembered those lessons vividly. Holloway had been merciless, pushing candidates harder than the physical instructors, identifying psychological breaking points, and forcing everyone to confront their mental limits. She had failed more candidates than any other instructor, and she made no apologies for it. Special Operations is 10% physical and 90% mental. Holloway had told Kara's Buds class during Hell Week, "Your body will do whatever your mind tells it to do. But when your mind breaks, your body becomes just meat waiting to be processed. I'm here to make sure your mind never breaks." Now Holloway sat in the corner of the Iron Anchor, and when her eyes met Kara's across the bar, she gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. A silent acknowledgement between warriors who understood each other without needing words. Kara returned the nod and turned back to her whiskey. She wasn't here to socialize or reminisce. She was here to decompress, to let the adrenaline fully drain from her system, to process what had happened in North Africa before she wrote her after-action report and moved on to whatever mission came next. The door opened, letting in a blast of warm Virginia evening air and the sounds of traffic from the street outside. Kara's eyes tracked to the entrance, automatically assessing threats, identifying faces, cataloging details. 6 Marines entered, and everything changed. They moved with the particular swagger of young men who had been drinking for several hours, their voices already loud, their movements exaggerated. They wore civilian clothes, but their bearing screamed military, the haircuts, the posture, the way they moved as a group with an unspoken hierarchy. The leader was impossible to miss. Staff Sergeant Riker Thorne stood about 6'2" and was built like someone who spent every spare moment in the gym. His arms strained against his shirt sleeves, his chest was a shelf of muscle, and his neck was thick enough to suggest steroid use. He had the kind of face that might have been handsome if it hadn't been twisted by arrogance, with cold blue eyes that swept the bar like he owned it. Behind him came 5 more Marines, each one trying to match their sergeant's aggressive energy. Corporal Dane Wolfe, lean and predatory. Corporal Trent Boyle, thick-shouldered and scowling. Lance Corporal Brett Garrison, moving with the controlled grace of someone who knew how to fight. Lance Corporal Wade Colson, hesitant and uncertain. Private First Class Quinn Aldrich, the youngest, trying desperately to fit in with men who terrified him. They headed straight for the bar, ordering beers, in voices loud enough to announce their presence to everyone in the establishment. Several of the older veterans looked up and assessed the situation and then deliberately turned back to their drinks. They had seen this type before, young men with something to prove and the testosterone to fuel bad decisions. Thorne's eyes scanned the bar, and then they locked onto Kara's corner booth. For a moment, his face registered surprise, followed quickly by something uglier, satisfaction. Kara saw the recognition in his eyes and felt her stomach sink. She had been recognized, which meant this wasn't going to be a quiet evening after all. Thorne leaned over to Wolf and whispered something. Wolf's eyes widened and he nodded. The information spread through the group like wildfire, hushed conversations, glances in Kara's direction, predatory grins spreading across faces. They knew who she was. The question was, how did they know Kara took another sip of whiskey and tried to project an aura of complete disinterest? She had dealt with drunk Marines before. Usually ignoring them was sufficient. They would make some comments, maybe some crude gestures, and then they would move on to easier targets or get bored and leave. But something about the way Thorne was looking at her suggested this wasn't going to be that simple. The Marines grabbed their beers and moved to a table near Kara's booth, not adjacent, but close enough to make their presence felt. They spoke in voices just loud enough to ensure she could hear every word. "I'm telling you," Thorne announced to his crew, though his eyes kept drifting to Kara. "The standards have been completely watered down. They're letting anyone into special operations now just to meet diversity quotas." Boyle nodded enthusiastically, playing to Thorne's lead. "Remember that briefing we got about the new integrated training program? They showed pictures of the first women to complete SEAL training. Made it sound like some kind of revolution." "Revolution," Thorne snorted. "More like a publicity stunt. Pentagon wants to look progressive, so they lower the bar until anyone can clear it. Doesn't matter if they can actually do the job." Kara's jaw tightened, but she kept her eyes on her whiskey. Engaging with drunk Marines who had something to prove was a losing proposition. They wanted a reaction, and she refused to give them one. Garrison, the one who moved like a boxer, was watching Kara more carefully than the others. He seemed less convinced by Thorne's rhetoric, more interested in actually assessing the woman who sat alone in the corner booth. "How do you know the standards were lowered?" Garrison asked Thorne. "I heard those women went through the same training as everyone else." Thorne's face darkened at the challenge to his narrative. "Because I know Garrison. I attempted BUDS 4 years ago. I know what that training is supposed to be like. And I know for a fact there's no way a woman could complete Hell Week without modifications." What Thorne didn't say, what he would never admit to his Marines, was that he had quit BUDS during the third day of Hell Week, not because of a physical failure, but because his mind had broken under the relentless pressure. The instructors had offered him the bell, that brass bell that rang out whenever a candidate quit, and Thorne had rung it with tears streaming down his face. He had spent the last 4 years trying to convince himself that he hadn't failed, that the training had been too difficult, that no one could reasonably be expected to complete it. And when news broke that women were not only attempting, but completing BUDS, it shattered every excuse he had built up. If women could do what he couldn't, then what did that say about him? The answer was too painful to accept. So Thorne had constructed a different narrative. The standards must have been lowered. It was the only explanation that allowed him to maintain his self-image. And now, sitting 20 feet away from him, was Lieutenant Commander Kara Brennan, one of the first 3 women to attempt BUD-IS and the only one to complete the full training. Her photo had been in the briefing materials Thorne's unit had received about integrated special operations training. He had stared at that photo for a long time, feeling something toxic coiling in his gut. Tonight, when he had heard from a contact at the base that the SEAL girl drank at the Iron Anchor most Friday nights, Thorne had seen an opportunity. An opportunity to prove that women didn't belong in special operations. An opportunity to demonstrate that he was stronger, tougher, more capable than some publicity stunt diversity hire. An opportunity to finally silence the voice in his head that whispered he was weak. He had texted his crew, told them to meet him at the Iron Anchor, and promised them a show. They had all been drinking for hours already, liquid courage fueling bad decisions. Now, seeing Kara sitting alone in her corner booth, Thorne felt the anger rising in his chest. She looked so calm, so composed, so utterly unbothered by their presence. It infuriated him. She should be intimidated. She should be afraid. She should recognize that she was out of her depth. Thorne drained his beer and stood up. His crew watched him, sensing that something was about to happen. Wolf started to stand as well, but Thorne waved him back down. "Let me handle this," Thorne said, his voice carrying across the bar. He walked toward Kara's booth with the exaggerated confidence of a man who had been drinking and didn't fully understand the danger he was walking into. The other patrons in the bar sensed the change in atmosphere. Conversations died. Eyes turned toward the corner booth where drunk Marine sergeant was approaching a woman who sat alone. In her shadowed corner, Colonel Holloway set down her gin and tonic and removed her reading glasses. Her hand moved inside her jacket, settling on something the other patrons couldn't see. Behind the bar, Marcus Oldfield reached for the phone, his finger hovering over the speed dial number for the military police. And Kara Brennan took one more sip of her whiskey, calculating distances, assessing threats, and preparing for what came next. Thorne stopped at her table and planted his palms on the worn wood surface, leaning in until Kara could smell the beer on his breath. His eyes were bloodshot, his face flushed with alcohol and aggression. "Well, look what we have here," Thorne announced loudly enough for everyone in the bar to hear. "Isn't this the poster girl for the new inclusive military, the SEAL who's supposed to prove women can do anything men can do?" Kara looked up at him with eyes that had seen too much death to be intimidated by a drunk sergeant. Her voice when she spoke was quiet and controlled. "I'm just here for a drink, Sergeant, not looking for trouble." Thorne's smile was ugly. "Too bad, because trouble found you." He swept his arm across the table, sending Kara's whiskey glass flying. It shattered against the wall, the amber liquid spreading across the floor like spilled blood. The bar went completely silent. Kara stood slowly, her movements controlled and deliberate. She was several inches shorter than Thorne, but something about the way she carried herself made the height difference irrelevant. She radiated a kind of dangerous calm that made even the drunk Marines at Thorne's table shift uncomfortably. "Last chance to walk away," Kara said quietly. "Go back to your crew, finish your beers, and we can all forget this happened." Thorne laughed, a harsh sound with no humor in it. "Walk away from you. Let me tell you something, SEAL girl. I attempted buds. I know what that training is supposed to be like. And there's no way, no fucking way you completed it without them lowering the standards. You're a diversity hire, a publicity stunt, and everyone in the real military knows it." Behind him, his 5 Marines were standing now, forming up like they had practiced this. They moved to surround Kara's booth, cutting off her exits, their faces a mix of alcohol-fueled aggression and uncertainty. Garrison the boxer looked the most uncomfortable. He positioned himself at the edge of the group, close enough to be part of it, but far enough to suggest he wasn't fully committed. Kara assessed the situation with the kind of cold clarity that came from years of operating in life-or-death scenarios. 6 opponents, all male, all larger than her. They had numbers and size, but they also had alcohol in their systems, which slowed reaction times and impaired judgment. They were bunched too close together, which limited their ability to attack simultaneously. And most critically, they had no idea who they were dealing with. 72 hours ago, Kara had carried a wounded Marine colonel across 400 meters of hostile terrain while eliminating 4 enemy combatants with one-handed pistol shots. She had survived situations that would have killed most operators. She had been trained by the best warriors America had ever produced, and these drunk Marines thought they could intimidate her. "No one's saving you now, SEAL girl," Thorne said, his voice dropping to a threatening growl. "Let's see what you're made of without your PR team around." Kara's response was calm, almost conversational. "You should know something before you do this. I wasn't trained as a Navy SEAL because I'm a woman. I was trained as a Navy SEAL because I was already a warrior." Thorne's face twisted with rage. In his alcohol-soaked mind, her words weren't a warning, they were a challenge. He reached out to grab her collar, to physically manhandle her, to prove his superiority through brute force. His hand never made contact. What happened next occurred in the space between heartbeats, a demonstration of violence so controlled and efficient that most of the witnesses would later struggle to explain exactly what they had seen. Kara's left hand moved first, intercepting Thorne's reaching arm at the wrist. Her right hand came up underneath, creating a fulcrum. She twisted, using his own momentum against him, applying pressure to joints that weren't designed to bend in that direction. The technique had been taught to her by instructors who had learned it from Lieutenant Commander Edward O'Hare, a legendary SEAL who had perfected close-quarters combat in places like Fallujah and Ramadi. Thorne's face went from aggressive confidence to shocked pain in less than a second. His knees buckled as Kara controlled him through the wrist lock, and then his face was being driven down toward the table where her whiskey had been sitting. The impact made a sound like a hammer hitting wood, hard enough to hurt, controlled enough not to cause serious injury. Thorne's nose broke. Blood spread across the table's surface, mixing with the spilled whiskey. "Stand down," Kara advised the other Marines. They didn't. Wolf and Boyle moved simultaneously, charging from opposite sides. It was a basic pincer movement, the kind of tactic that worked in theory, but required coordination and sobriety to execute properly. They had neither. Kara released Thorne with a push that sent him staggering backward. She pivoted, using the sergeant's unbalanced body as a counterweight. Her right leg came up in a controlled kick that caught Wolf in the chest, sending him crashing backward into a table. Her left leg followed immediately, striking Boyle in the sternum, with enough force to knock the air from his lungs and send him stumbling into the bar's wall. Glasses shattered. Chairs toppled. The other patrons scrambled back, giving the fight space. Garrison moved in next, and he moved with the disciplined precision of someone who actually knew how to fight. He had been a Golden Gloves finalist in his youth, and his stance showed it, weight-balanced, hands up, moving with purpose. He threw a tight hook aimed at Kara's head, a punch that would have ended the fight if it had connected. It didn't connect. Kara read the punch before he threw it. She saw his shoulder dip, saw his weight shift, saw the mechanical setup that telegraphed his intentions. She dropped below the hook so low that Garrison's fist passed through empty air above her head. Then she swept his legs with a technique that used his own forward momentum against him. Garrison crashed to the floor hard, the impact driving the air from his lungs. He tried to get up, but Kara's boot pressed down on his chest, not hard enough to injure, but firm enough to communicate that he should stay down. "You telegraph with your shoulder," Kara told him, her voice not even winded. "If I can read it, the enemy will read it. And they won't just sweep your legs, they'll put 2 rounds in your chest while you're committing to that hook." Coulson grabbed her from behind in a bear hug, his arms wrapping around her torso and pinning her arms. He was strong, considerably stronger than Kara in terms of raw muscle mass. But strength without technique was just energy waiting to be redirected. The bear hug compressed Kara's ribs, pressing directly on the wound that was still healing from North Africa. She felt the stitches strain, felt warm blood beginning to seep through the bandage underneath her shirt. The pain was sharp and immediate, but pain was just information, and Kara had been trained to use information effectively. She drove her heel down onto Coulson's instep with the full weight of her body behind it. The small bones of the foot metatarsals phalanges were not designed to withstand that kind of focused impact. Something cracked. Coulson screamed, and his grip loosened. Kara snapped her head backward, a reverse headbutt that caught Coulson square in the nose. More blood, more pain, more screaming. She broke free of his grip, spun to face him, and delivered a precise strike to his solar plexus. The blow wasn't about power, it was about accuracy, hitting the nerve cluster that would temporarily disable his diaphragm and leave him gasping on the floor. Coulson dropped to his knees, trying to breathe and failing. That was 4 Marines down in less than 30 seconds. 2 remained standing. Aldrich, the youngest, had been hanging back, watching his friends and his sergeant get systematically dismantled by a woman half their size. The alcohol in his system told him to attack. The part of his brain that still functioned properly told him to run. He attacked. Aldrich threw a wild haymaker, the kind of punch that came from watching too many action movies and spending too little time in the actual training. Kara didn't even need to block it. She simply moved her head 6 inches to the side, let the punch sail past, and then delivered a knife hand strike to the nerve cluster in Aldrich's neck. Aldrich's body went momentarily rigid, every muscle locking up. Then he collapsed like someone had cut his strings. That left Thorne, who was back on his feet despite his broken nose, blood streaming down his face, rage and humiliation warring in his eyes. He reached behind his back and pulled out a knife. Not a standard-issue military blade, but a KA bar fighting knife with a 7-inch blade and a handle wrapped in paracord. It was a personal weapon, the kind that Marines sometimes carried as a symbol of toughness. Thorne had purchased it after failing Bud Bass, a compensation for the warrior identity he could no longer claim. "You're fucking dead," Thorne snarled, his words slurred by the broken nose and the alcohol and the rage that consumed him. The atmosphere in the bar changed instantly. Broken furniture and hurt pride were one thing; those could be explained away as a bar fight that got out of hand. But a knife changed everything. A knife meant lethal intent. A knife meant someone might actually die. Marcus Oldfield grabbed the phone behind the bar and dialed the military police. In her corner, Colonel Holloway stood, her hand emerging from her jacket with a compact pistol, a 6-hour P365 licensed for concealed carry. She didn't point it at anyone, but her message was clear. If that knife got too close to Kara, she would intervene. and Kara Brennan, who had survived firefights in 3 countries, who had carried wounded comrades under enemy fire, who had been trained by the best warriors America could produce, made a decision. She wouldn't draw her own weapon. The ankle holster pressing against her leg held a pistol she could access in under 2 seconds, but using it would escalate this beyond any hope of de-escalation. She was in a civilian bar surrounded by witnesses. Shooting an unarmed drunk Marine, even one holding a knife, would create legal complications that could destroy her career. So instead, she would do what she had been trained to do, end this fight without killing anyone. Thorne lunged with the knife, a wild overhand stab driven by rage rather than skill. He had no training in knife fighting. He had only rage and pain and the desperate need to prove he wasn't weak. Kara sidestepped the lunge, her movement minimal and precise. She caught Thorne's wrist with both hands, controlling the knife hand, and then she executed a technique that Lieutenant Commander O'Hare had learned from Israeli Krav Maga instructors, a disarm that used joint manipulation and leverage to create overwhelming pain compliance. Thorne's wrist bent at an angle that wrists were never meant to bend. Something snapped the radius bone, though Kara didn't know that in the moment. She only knew that Thorne screamed, the knife clattered to the floor, and the threat was neutralized. But she wasn't done. Thorne was still standing still, full of rage and alcohol, and the kind of prideful stupidity that got Marines killed in actual combat. So Kara finished it. She maintained control of his broken wrist, stepped inside his reach, and delivered 3 precise strikes, one to his already broken nose, driving the pain to a level that overwhelmed his nervous system, one to his solar plexus, stealing his breath, and one to his inner thigh, a nerve strike that made his leg buckle. Thorne went down hard, clutching his broken wrist, blood pouring from his nose, gasping for air that wouldn't come. Around him lay his 5 Marines in various states of consciousness and injury. Kara stood in the center of the wreckage, breathing hard, blood seeping through her shirt where the stitches had torn. Her eyes scanned the bar, checking for additional threats, ensuring the fight was truly over. The bar's wall clock read 40 seconds since Thorne had first grabbed for her collar. 40 seconds to dismantle 6 Marines. 40 seconds that would be captured on multiple smartphone cameras and would go viral across social media before the night was over. 40 seconds that would change everything. The sun rose over Virginia Beach with the kind of indifferent beauty that nature reserved for mornings after violence. Kara Brennan woke at 05:30 hours to a phone that had transformed into a weapon of mass communication. 47 missed calls, 213 text messages. Her personal email had been flooded with interview requests, speaking invitations, and messages from people she had never met, offering opinions about events they hadn't witnessed. She ignored all of it and went through her morning routine with the mechanical precision that kept operators functional when the world tried to pull them apart. Shower. Check the compression bandage Senior Chief Garrett had wrapped around her restitched ribs. Light stretching that didn't stress the wound. Black coffee, 2 eggs, wheat toast. The rituals mattered because they established normalcy in a life that had just become exponentially more complicated. Only after she had reestablished her baseline did Kara check the messages systematically, sorting them by priority. Most were noise reporters, hunting for headlines, civilians with strong opinions about women in combat, fellow service members offering support or criticism. But 3 messages stood out, all from Master Chief Wesley Stanton, her commanding officer. The timestamp showed increasing urgency: 22:47 hours, 03:12 hours, 05:21 hours. The final message was brutally direct. My office, 0800, bring your service khakis. This is mandatory, not optional. We have a situation. Kara arrived at Naval Special Warfare Command at 07:45 wearing her uniform, despite the pain of getting the crisp fabric over her bandaged torso. The building looked innocuous from the outside, generic government architecture that could have housed accountants or supply clerks. But inside these walls lived some of the most dangerous operators in the American military arsenal. And today, Kara would learn exactly how much damage a viral video could do to a career built on staying invisible. Master Chief Stanton's office occupied the 3rd-floor corner with windows that overlooked nothing interesting, which was exactly how he preferred it. He was 55 years old and built like a concrete block with a face that had seen too much combat to waste time on pleasantries. He had started as a young SEAL during the final years of the Cold War, operating in places that still didn't officially exist, and had continued through conflicts that reshaped modern warfare. His reputation was simple, absolutely fair, and absolutely uncompromising. But today he wasn't alone. Captain Rachel Morrison stood beside his desk in her Navy service dress blues, and her presence told Kara everything she needed to know about how bad this situation had become. Captain Morrison was the public affairs officer for Naval Special Warfare, which meant she existed at the intersection of military operations and civilian perception. She only got involved when those two worlds collided badly enough to threaten institutional interests. "Sit down, Commander," Stanton said. His voice carried the gravel of 3 decades in special operations. "And before you ask, no, this isn't about whether you were justified. The MPs closed that investigation last night. Clear-cut self-defense, no charges, no further action required." He turned his computer monitor toward her. The screen displayed CNN's homepage with a headline that made Kara's stomach drop. "Violent female Navy SEAL attacks 6 Marines in bar brawl." "That's CNN." Stanton continued clicking through tabs. "Fox News is running. SEAL commander's assault raises questions about combat standards. MSNBC has female warrior defends herself against military harassment. The Daily Mail in Britain somehow has photos of you from Bud's training that they definitely shouldn't have access to." He closed the browser. "Everyone has an angle, and every single one of them is wrong because they're missing the context we can't provide." Captain Morrison stepped forward with a tablet that glowed with statistics that would have been impressive if they weren't so terrifying. "Commander Brennan, as of 0700 this morning, the primary video of your confrontation has been viewed 12.4 million times across various platforms. It's trending number 3 on Twitter, number 1 on TikTok, and has generated over 40,000 news articles in 17 languages." She swiped through screens showing charts and graphs. "We've received 319 media requests for interviews, including every major morning show, cable news network, podcast, and several international outlets. The Pentagon's Public Affairs Office has been fielding calls since midnight. And we can't explain the context," Kara said quietly, understanding the impossible position, "because the mission I returned from 72 hours ago is classified at the highest levels." "Exactly," Morrison confirmed. "The North Africa extraction is compartmented information. The hostages you rescued included Colonel Bridger, who was conducting a counterintelligence investigation that's still active. The 2 contractors who died are part of an ongoing probe into operational security breaches. We can't declassify any of it without compromising current operations and potentially getting more people killed." Stanton leaned back in his chair, and Kara saw something in his expression that she had never seen before: genuine concern, not for the institution, but for her personally. "So the public narrative is simple and wrong," he said. "Female SEAL gets drunk in a bar and beats up 6 Marines because she has something to prove about women in combat. The nuance that you were attacked in a premeditated assault by men who planned to humiliate you, that you showed remarkable restraint by not killing Sergeant Thorne when he drew that knife, that you're a decorated combat veteran who saved 16 lives 3 days ago, all of that disappears into classified files." The weight of it settled on Kara like the full combat load she had carried across that North African compound. She had spent her entire career trying to be invisible, trying to let her actions speak louder than any words, trying to prove herself quietly the way her father had taught her. And now she was viral content, a symbol for debates she had never wanted to be part of, a data point in cultural arguments that had nothing to do with the reality of what had happened. "We have 3 options," Stanton said, and the way he said it told Kara that these weren't really options at all. "Option 1, full press conference. You go public, explain what happened, provide as much context as classification allows. Show your injuries from North Africa, demonstrate that you're a combat veteran, not some aggressive publicity stunt. The upside is you control the narrative. The downside is you become the permanent face of women in combat, and every opinion about gender integration in the military gets projected onto you for the rest of your career." Kara felt her jaw tighten. She had watched other operators get caught in that trap, their actual service eclipsed by their symbolic value. They stopped being warriors and became talking points, their complexity reduced to whatever narrative fit the current political moment. "Option 2, Stanton continued, is administrative leave. You go home, stay out of sight, let the media cycle burn itself out. Could be weeks, could be months. Eventually the story fades and we bring you back to operational status when nobody's paying attention anymore." He paused. The problem is it looks like we're punishing you for defending yourself. It signals that we don't stand behind our operators when they do what they're trained to do. Captain Morrison added, it also leaves the narrative entirely in the hands of people who don't understand military culture, special operations, or what actually happened. The vacuum gets filled with speculation, and speculation trends toward the sensational. What's option 3? Kara asked, though she was beginning to understand where this was heading. Colonel James Bridger submitted a formal request at 05:30 this morning, Stanton said, pulling up a document on his screen. He wants you to lead an 8-week integrated training program at Camp Lejeune. Close quarters combat instruction for a mixed unit, SEALs, Marines, Army Rangers. Joint Special Operations training with a focus on the techniques that made you effective. He looked at Kara directly. The program starts Monday, 3 days from now. Morrison jumped in with the public affairs angle. From our perspective, option 3 is ideal. It demonstrates constructive action, shows inter-service cooperation, moves you out of the media spotlight while keeping you in an active duty role. It signals that the military values your expertise enough to have you train the next generation. And it prevents the narrative from becoming about punishment or avoidance. Kara absorbed the information, reading between the lines of what they weren't saying directly. This wasn't really a choice. It was a strongly encouraged direction, disguised as options, the military's way of solving multiple problems simultaneously. The 5 Marines from the bar, Kara said, are they part of this training program? Stanton's expression confirmed her suspicion before he spoke. Colonel Bridger specifically requested they be included. Staff Sergeant Thorne is facing court-martial and will be excluded. But the other 5 corporals, Wolf and Boyle Lance Corporals Garrison and Coulson, Private First Class Aldrich, they'll be students in your class. He leaned forward. Bridger believes they can learn more from training under you than from whatever punishment the military justice system would deliver. He wants you to show them what they actually attacked. You're asking me to teach the men who tried to kill me, Kara said, keeping her voice neutral, despite the anger rising in her chest. I'm asking you to do what your father did for 30 years, Stanton replied, his voice gentler now. Patrick Brennan trained young soldiers who made mistakes, who came in with wrong ideas, who needed someone to show them what being a warrior actually meant. He turned dozens of potential failures into professionals who served with honor. You have that same gift. The mention of her father hit harder than Kara expected. Command Sergeant Major Patrick Brennan had been dead for 5 years, killed by the kind of cancer that targeted warriors who spent too much time around burn pits and chemical weapons. But his lessons lived in his daughter, encoded in muscle memory and tactical awareness, and the understanding that warriors built legacies that outlasted individual conflicts. If I take option 3, Kara said, I run the program my way. No interference, no modifications to accommodate anyone's sensibilities, no restrictions on how I teach. Agreed, Stanton said immediately. Bridger made the same request. He wants you to push these students harder than they've ever been pushed. If some of them fail, that's acceptable. If all of them fail, that's a problem. But you have complete authority over curriculum standards and evaluation. In the investigation Bridger was conducting, Kara asked, the leak that got those 2 contractors killed. Stanton exchanged a glance with Morrison, who stepped out of the office and closed the door behind her. When they were alone, Stanton's voice dropped to a level that wouldn't carry beyond the walls. Bridger believes he's identified the leak. Lieutenant Colonel David Thornton, assigned to Special Operations Command with access to mission planning at the highest levels. But he needs proof that will hold up in a court-martial, and he needs someone to get close enough to Thornton to gather that proof. Stanton studied Kara carefully. Someone Thornton won't recognize as part of the investigation. Someone with a plausible reason to be at the Special Operations Conference Thornton is attending next week at Fort Bragg. You want me to be bait, Kara said. I want you to be what you are, a subject matter expert on integrated training who's attending a conference on special operations methodology. Thornton will be there presenting on mission planning protocols. You establish contact, assess his security awareness, identify vulnerabilities. Nothing dramatic, just reconnaissance. Kara thought about the 2 contractors whose faces still haunted her. She thought about the fact that they had died because someone in their own command structure had betrayed them to the enemy. She thought about justice and duty and the oath she had sworn to defend against all enemies, foreign and domestic. "I'll take option 3, she said. 8 weeks at Camp Lejeune, full authority over the program. And I'll do your reconnaissance at Fort Bragg." "Good," Stanton said, allowing himself a slight smile. "Bridger will brief you on the investigation details this afternoon. Captain Morrison will handle the media statement, something generic about Commander Brennan taking a temporary training assignment. No further details, end of story. And Commander," he stood extending his hand, "for what it's worth, I would have done exactly what you did in that bar. You showed more restraint than most operators would have. Your father would be proud." The weekend became a blur of preparation. Kara developed training curricula that pulled from every combat deployment, every close quarters engagement, every lesson she had learned from instructors who had trained her. She ordered equipment coordinated with Camp Lejeune facilities management and tried to ignore the media circus that continued to dissect her life in increasingly absurd ways. Colonel Bridger arrived at her apartment Saturday evening with 2 men who carried themselves like intelligence professionals. They sat at her kitchen table and laid out the investigation with the kind of detail that made Kara understand exactly how dangerous this was becoming. "Lieutenant Colonel David Thornton," Bridger said, sliding a photograph across the table. 42 years old, West Point graduate, exemplary service record on paper. He's been in Special Operations Command for 6 years with access to mission planning for SEAL Teams, Delta Force, and Ranger operations across 3 theaters. One of the intelligence professionals, he had introduced himself only as Mr. Gray pulled out a tablet showing financial records. 3 years ago, Thornton's spending patterns changed. He bought a house in Alexandria that should have been beyond his salary. His wife started wearing jewelry that doesn't match their income. Small things, but consistent. We traced the money to an offshore account that received deposits from a shell corporation in Cyprus. The second intelligence professional, a woman who had identified herself as Ms. Webb, added her analysis. "We've correlated Thornton's travel with 8 incidents where enemy forces had advanced knowledge of American operations. North Africa is just the most recent. There was a Ranger operation in Syria that got ambushed, a SEAL team in Yemen that walked into a kill zone, a Delta extraction in Iraq that found the target already moved." She pulled up a map showing the incidents. Every time Thornton had access to the operational planning at least 72 hours before execution. "But we can't prove he passed the information," Bridger said. "We have circumstantial evidence, financial anomalies, and suspicious correlations. What we don't have is direct proof that will hold up in a court-martial and survive appeal." Kara studied Thornton's photograph. He looked like 1,000 other special operations officers, fit, confident, the kind of face that projected competence and inspired trust, which was exactly what made him dangerous. "The Fort Bragg conference," Kara said. "What's my cover?" "You're attending as a subject matter expert on integrated training," Mr. Gray explained. "It's plausible given your new assignment, and it puts you in the same professional circles as Thornton without raising suspicion. You'll attend panels, participate in discussions, and gradually work your way into conversations with him." "What's the objective?" Kara asked. "Assessment," Ms. Webb replied. "We need to understand his security protocols. Does he use encrypted communications? Does he meet with foreign contacts during these conferences? Does he have any patterns or habits we can exploit? You're not trying to catch him in the act. You are mapping the target so we can plan the actual operation." They spent 3 hours going over Thornton's background, his professional relationships, his known associates, and the kind of conversation topics that would establish Kara as a credible peer. By the time they left, Kara had memorized enough information to pass as someone who had been working in training development for years, rather than someone who had been fighting in North Africa 4 days ago. Sunday night, Kara lay in bed staring at the ceiling, thinking about the week ahead. Monday, she would face 35 students, 5 of whom had tried to kill her in a bar just 3 days earlier. Then she would spend a week at Fort Bragg pretending to be interested in academic discussions while actually hunting a traitor who had gotten Americans killed. Her phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "This is Corporal Brett Garrison. I know I have no right to contact you, but I wanted you to know that I understand what you're doing for us. We won't waste this chance. Thank you." Kara stared at the message for a long time before typing a response. "Show up ready to work. That's all I ask." Monday morning arrived with the kind of cold clarity that North Carolina provided in early autumn. Kara drove to Camp Lejeune in her father's old Ford pickup, a truck that still smelled faintly of the cigars that had probably contributed to killing him. The training facility was a converted warehouse on the eastern edge of the base, equipped with padded floors and enough space to run full tactical scenarios. 35 students were waiting when she arrived. 12 SEALs, 15 Marines, 8 Army Rangers. All male, all watching her, with expressions ranging from professional curiosity to barely concealed hostility. And standing together in a group that was trying too hard to look casual, Wolf, Boyle, Garrison, Colson, and Aldrich. The 5 Marines from the bar still bearing visible injuries from their catastrophic mistake. Kara walked to the center of the training floor and let the silence build until every conversation died. "My name is Lieutenant Commander Kara Brennan," she began, her voice carrying clearly across the warehouse. "For the next 8 weeks, I am your primary instructor for close quarters combat and integrated tactical operations. Let's establish the ground rules immediately." She began walking along the line of students, making eye contact with each one. "First rank means nothing in this facility. I don't care if you're a SEAL with treated deployments or a private who graduated basic training last month. You're all students, and you'll all be held to the same standard. The only hierarchy that matters is competence." She stopped in front of Garrison, who met her eyes without flinching. "Second, some of you know me from unfortunate circumstances outside this facility. That's irrelevant now. What matters is whether you're willing to learn and whether you have the discipline to become better warriors than you are today." She continued down the line. "The enemy doesn't ask your gender or your branch of service before trying to kill you. Death is an equal opportunity employer. The only question that matters is whether you're the most lethal, most prepared, most disciplined operator in that space. My job is to increase your chances of being that operator." An Army Ranger in the back raised his hand. Staff Sergeant Kyle Morrison, whose service record showed 3 combat deployments. "Ma'am, are we going to address the video that went viral? Because some of us have questions." "Fair question," Kara replied. "Yes, I was involved in an incident 10 days ago. 6 Marines attacked me in a premeditated assault. I defended myself using appropriate force. Military police investigated and closed the case. That's all the context you need. Now, who wants to learn the techniques I used?" Every hand went up. For the next 3 hours, Kara pushed them through the fundamentals of close quarters combat, breaking down complex movements into component parts, explaining the physics and biomechanics that made techniques effective. She demonstrated with Chief Petty Officer Marcus Reeves, one of her former SEAL teammates, who Stanton had assigned to the course as both assistant instructor and insurance policy. By the end of day 1, every student was exhausted. Several were injured in minor ways, and all of them understood that this training program would be the hardest thing they had done since their initial military qualifications. Garrison approached her after the other students had left. "Ma'am, I know I don't have the right to ask for anything from you, but could you explain how you read my punch before I threw it? You said I telegraphed with my shoulder." Kara studied him for a moment, seeing genuine curiosity rather than challenge. "Come back tomorrow, an hour early. I'll show you." Tuesday morning, Garrison arrived at 0500 and spent 2 hours drilling the mechanics of striking without telegraphing. By the time the other students arrived, his technique had improved noticeably. Wednesday, Wolf asked for extra instruction on knife defense. Thursday, Colson requested help with joint locks. By Friday, all 5 Marines from the bar fight were arriving early and staying late, pushing themselves harder than anyone else in the class. "They're trying to prove something," Reeves observed after the Friday session. "Not to you, to themselves." "Good," Kara replied. "That's the only kind of motivation that matters." Friday evening, Kara packed for Fort Bragg. The conference started Monday, which meant she had a weekend to review her cover story and prepare for the most dangerous kind of combat, the kind where the enemy didn't know you were hunting them. The Special Operations Training Conference occupied Fort Bragg's Professional Development Complex, a modern facility that looked more like a corporate conference center than a military installation. 300 attendees from every branch of service, all focused on the evolving challenges of preparing warriors for asymmetric warfare. Kara registered under her real name. There was no point in trying to hide her identity, and received a badge that identified her as LCDR Brennan Naval Special Warfare Integrated Training Development. It was close enough to the truth to be plausible and vague enough to allow for flexible conversations. Lieutenant Colonel David Thornton was presenting Tuesday morning on operational security and mission planning. Kara attended his presentation along with 70 other officers watching him carefully while taking notes that looked professional but actually documented his mannerisms, speech patterns, and the way he interacted with attendees. He was good, charismatic without being flashy, knowledgeable without being arrogant, the kind of officer who made people want to trust him, which was exactly what made him dangerous. During the break, Kara positioned herself near the coffee station where Thornton was talking with a group of senior officers. She waited until there was a pause in conversation, then asked an intelligent question about compartmented information protocols that demonstrated she understood the subject matter at a sophisticated level. Thornton's eyes lit up with professional interest. That's an excellent question, Commander. Are you working in mission planning? Training development, Kara replied. But we deal with classification issues when we're trying to create realistic scenarios without compromising ongoing operations. They talked for 15 minutes about the challenges of balancing training realism with operational security. Thornton was engaging and helpful, offering insights that seemed generous. But Kara noticed small things: the way his eyes tracked who else was listening, the way he subtly steered conversations away from his own specific work, the practiced ease with which he established rapport. Tuesday evening, he invited her to dinner at an off-base restaurant. Over steak and wine, the conversation ranged from military culture to the challenges of special operations in the modern era. And then Thornton shifted to territory that made Kara's instincts activate. That video of you in the bar was impressive, he said. 6 Marines in 40 seconds. Those techniques came from somewhere beyond standard military combatives. Years of training, Kara replied carefully. In 3 combat deployments where I learned what actually works. I heard you were part of that hostage rescue in North Africa recently. The one that extracted Colonel Bridger and some contractors. Every alarm in Kara's head started screaming. That mission was classified at the highest level. How did Thornton know about it? I can't discuss operational details, sir. Thornton smiled, but the warmth didn't reach his eyes. Of course. Operational security. Though it's interesting how information flows in our community, isn't it? Sometimes the wrong people hear about missions they shouldn't know about. The threat was implicit but clear. Thornton was telling her he had access to classified information, and he was assessing whether she represented a danger to whatever operation he was running. Kara maintained her cover, steering the conversation back to training methodology. But the moment she returned to her hotel room, she called Bridger on the secure phone. He knows about North Africa. He mentioned it specifically with details that are classified. He's either the leak or he's connected to it, and he was testing to see if I'm part of your investigation. Did he suspect your real purpose? I don't think so, but he's careful and he's smart. We need to move fast before he realizes we're closing in. The call lasted 30 minutes with Bridger and his intelligence team adjusting their approach based on Kara's observations. When she finally disconnected, exhausted, she understood with absolute clarity that some battles couldn't be won with physical force. Sometimes you had to be patient, deceptive, and willing to operate in the gray areas where warriors and spies overlapped. She returned to Camp Lejeune the following week, and the students immediately noticed a change in her instruction. She was harder, more demanding, pushing them to understand that threats didn't always come from obvious enemies, that betrayal could come from within, that warriors needed to be alert for dangers that wore friendly faces. The 5 Marines from the bar fight seemed to sense something had shifted. After training Thursday evening, Garrison approached her with the other 4 behind him. Ma'am, we know we don't deserve to know what's going on. But if you need anything at all, we're here. You gave us a second chance. We won't forget that. Kara looked at them, these young men who had tried to kill her 11 days ago, who were now working harder than anyone else to prove they were worthy of the mercy she had shown. Stay ready, she told them, and trust your training. That's all any warrior can do. Week 4 of the training program arrived with the kind of brutal honesty that separated warriors from pretenders. The initial excitement had faded, replaced by the grinding reality of pushing the human body beyond limits it thought were absolute. Students woke at Euro 500 to muscles that screamed protest joints, that ached with accumulated stress, and the psychological weight of knowing today would be harder than yesterday. Kara Brennan watched them arrive each morning, reading the exhaustion in their movements, the doubt creeping into their eyes. This was the moment when most training programs lost their weakest candidates. But this wasn't most training programs, and Kara wasn't interested in letting anyone quit. Pain is temporary, she told them, as they formed up for morning physical training. But the habits you build here, the discipline, the mental toughness, the refusal to quit when everything hurts, those last forever. Your body will recover. Your mind becomes stronger. That's the trade. She pushed them through 2 hours of conditioning that would have broken her 6 months earlier. But these weren't the same students who had arrived in week one. They had evolved their bodies, adapting their minds, learning to operate through discomfort. Even the 5 Marines from the bar fight Wolf Bull, Garrison, Colson, and Aldrich had transformed from uncomfortable outsiders to integral members of the class. During the afternoon session on knife defense, Kara demonstrated the disarm technique she had used against Staff Sergeant Thorne. She moved in slow motion with Chief Reeves as her attacker, breaking down each component of the movement. The key is controlling the weapon hand immediately, she explained, her voice carrying across the training floor. In a real knife fight, you are probably getting cut. Except that the goal isn't to avoid injury, it's to ensure the cuts are superficial rather than fatal. Control the knife, control the outcome. She had the students pair off and practice walking between them to correct grips and angles. When she reached Wolf and Boyle, she stopped. Corporal Wolf, you're hesitating. You're afraid of hurting your partner. Wolf looked uncomfortable, his face flushing. Ma'am, I'm just trying to maintain control. Control is good, fear is not. In combat, hesitation gets you killed. Kara stepped closer, pulling a training knife from her belt, a rubber blade weighted to feel like real steel. You were at the bar. You remember how this feels when someone commits fully. Use that memory. Show me the technique at full speed. I'll be your attacker. Wolf's face went pale. Ma'am, I can't. That's an order, Corporal. Kara moved into an attack posture, the training knife held low and ready. The warehouse went silent, every student watching this moment unfold. Wolf attacked, and for the first time since arriving at the program, he moved with genuine commitment. Kara executed the disarm with fluid precision, controlling his wrist, applying leverage, taking him to the ground in a controlled manner that demonstrated technique without causing injury. Better, she said, helping him up, but you still held back at the end, again. They drilled the technique 20 times each iteration, forcing Wolf to push past his psychological barrier, to commit fully despite his fear of accidentally harming the instructor who had once destroyed him in actual combat. By the 20th repetition, he was executing the disarm with real competence. That's what I needed to see, Kara told him. You have good instincts. You just needed to trust them. After that session, something shifted in the class dynamic. The 5 Marines stopped being the guys who had attacked the instructor and became just 5 more students working to master difficult skills. Questions became more direct. Training became more intense. And gradually, genuine mutual respect began to develop. Friday evening of week 5, Colonel Bridger appeared at the training facility with news that would change everything. Commander, we need to talk. Privately. They walked to a small office away from the training floor. Bridger closed the door and his expression told Kara this wasn't routine communication. The investigation has reached a critical point. We have enough circumstantial evidence to arrest Thornton, but his lawyers would tear it apart in court-martial. We need something definitive, a direct connection between him and foreign intelligence services. Bridger pulled out a tablet showing surveillance photos. Our counterintelligence team has identified a pattern. Thornton meets with a suspected foreign operative every 6 weeks at different locations. The next meeting is scheduled for Tuesday evening in Alexandria. You want me there, Kara said. I want you to be visible. We're going to arrange for you to be at the same restaurant. Pure coincidence you're having dinner with a friend. Thornton knows who you are from the Fort Bragg conference. If he sees you there, his paranoia will spike. We're hoping that stress will force him to make contact with his handlers in a way we can document. I'm bait. You're a catalyst, and you'll have a full surveillance team within 50 meters at all times. Bridger's expression was grave. I wouldn't ask this if I had another option. But those 2 contractors who died in North Africa, they deserve justice. And the operators who will die in future missions if we don't stop this leak, they deserve to be protected. Kara thought about the faces that still haunted her dreams. 2 Americans who had died because someone they trusted had betrayed them. When do we move? Tuesday. I'll have someone brief you on the details Monday evening. Bridger hesitated, then added, And Commander, thank you for all of it. The training program, the investigation work. You're doing what most operators can't, fighting enemies on multiple fronts simultaneously. Monday's training session focused on integrated tactics, combining everything the students had learned over 5 weeks into coordinated team operations. Kara set up scenarios that required SEALs, Marines, and Rangers to work together, breaking down the tribal mentalities that usually kept the branches separate. During one exercise, she paired Garrison with a SEAL team operator for building clearance. They moved together with surprising effectiveness, the Marines' aggressive energy balanced by the SEALs' methodical precision. "That's what I want to see," Kara called out. "You're not Marines or SEALs in this exercise. You're warriors who happen to wear different uniforms. The enemy doesn't care about your branch of service. They only care that you're American. Start thinking like a unified force." After the session, she pulled the 5 Marines aside. "I'm going to be gone Tuesday evening for operational reasons I can't discuss. Chief Reeves will run Wednesday's training. I need you 5 to set the example for the rest of the class. Can you do that?" "Yes, ma'am," they responded in unison. "Good, because you've come further in 5 weeks than I expected. Don't waste it." Tuesday evening, Kara sat at a corner table in an upscale Alexandria restaurant, wearing civilian clothes and trying to look like someone enjoying dinner with a friend. The friend was Ms. Webb from Bridger's intelligence team, playing the role of an old college roommate catching up after years apart. They talked about nothing important while Kara's peripheral vision tracked every person entering the restaurant. Lieutenant Colonel David Thornton arrived at 1847 hours, impeccably dressed in a suit that probably cost more than Kara's monthly salary. He was alone, scanning the restaurant with the kind of casual awareness that suggested professional training. His eyes passed over Kara, registered recognition, and his expression showed the briefest flash of concern before he masked it with a polite nod. Kara returned the nod and went back to her conversation with Ms. Webb, appearing unconcerned. But she felt Thornton's attention on her like a physical weight, his mind calculating what her presence meant, whether it was coincidence or surveillance. 20 minutes later, a man entered the restaurant, European late 50s, moving with the careful neutrality of someone trained in tradecraft. He joined Thornton's table, and the two began what looked like a casual business dinner. Kara's phone buzzed with a text from Mr. Gray. "Target 2 confirmed as Dmitry Volkov, suspected SVR officer operating under diplomatic cover. We're recording everything." The dinner lasted 90 minutes. Kara and Ms. Webb left before Thornton and Volkov, maintaining the fiction that this had been nothing more than a coincidental evening out. But as they walked to their car, Kara saw Thornton watching from the restaurant window, his expression calculating and cold. "He knows," Ms. Webb said quietly. "He knows we're investigating him." "Good," Kara replied. "Scared people make mistakes." Wednesday morning, Kara returned to Camp Lejeune to find the training program running smoothly under Chief Reeves' supervision. But there was an edge to the students' energy, a sense that something had shifted in the final weeks of the course. "They asked when the final evaluation would be," Reeves told her. "They want to know how they'll be tested." Kara smiled. This was the moment she had been planning since week 1. Thursday morning, she assembled all 35 students in the training warehouse. "You've spent 6 weeks learning individual techniques and basic team coordination. Now it's time to find out if you can actually function under pressure." She pulled a tarp off a table, revealing tactical gear. "Tomorrow at Earth 300 hours, this base will experience a simulated crisis. Hostile actors will attempt to breach the ammunition depot. You will respond as an integrated unit to neutralize the threat and secure the facility. This is not a drill, this is your final evaluation." The students exchanged glances, uncertainty and excitement mixing on their faces. "You'll have 4 hours to plan your response. Chief Reeves will provide you with the depot layout, known threat assessment, and available resources. After that, you're on your own. The opposing force will be composed of instructors from Marine Raiders and Army Special Forces who have been training specifically to beat you." She paused. "Questions?" Garrison raised his hand. "Ma'am, will we know who the hostiles are, or is this a scenario where anyone could be a threat?" "Excellent question. You'll need to identify threats based on behavior and intelligence, not uniforms. Welcome to modern warfare." The students spent Thursday afternoon and evening planning their response. Kara watched from a distance, observing how they organized themselves, how the natural leaders emerged, how the different branches negotiated tactics and responsibilities. Wolf surprised her by taking charge of the planning session, drawing on his tactical knowledge while soliciting input from the SEALs and Rangers. Garrison handled the fire support element using his combat experience to position shooters effectively. Boyle coordinated communications. Coulson managed logistics. Aldrich, the youngest, volunteered for the most dangerous assignment, point man, for the initial breach. They've grown, Reeves observed. 5 weeks ago, those Marines would have been trying to prove they were tougher than everyone else. Now they're actually working as part of a team. That's what happens when people stop trying to prove themselves and start trying to be useful, Kara replied. Friday at 0300 hours, the simulation began. Kara watched from the operations center as her students responded to the crisis alert. They moved with practiced efficiency, implementing the plan they had developed, but adapting in real time as the situation evolved. The opposing force experienced instructors playing the role of hostile actors hit them with surprises that weren't in the briefing, additional threats, equipment, failures, civilian role players creating confusion. The students adapted. When Wolf's primary communications failed, he switched to hand signals without breaking stride. When Garrison's fire support team encountered unexpected obstacles, they repositioned, using cover and movement techniques Kara had taught in week 3. When Aldrich discovered a suspected IED, he followed proper EOD protocols instead of trying to be a hero. The simulation lasted 2 hours. When it ended, the students had successfully secured the ammunition depot, neutralized all hostile actors, and accomplished their mission with 0 simulated casualties. Kara walked onto the training floor where her exhausted students were gathering. Final debrief happens at 1400 hours. Until then, get cleaned up and get some rest. Good work. As they dispersed, Garrison approached her with the other 4 Marines. Ma'am, I know this isn't the time, but we wanted to thank you for save it for after graduation, Kara interrupted. You haven't completed the program yet. But she allowed herself a slight smile and they understood. The formal graduation ceremony happened Friday afternoon with Colonel Bridger and Master Chief Stanton in attendance. All 35 students had completed the program, though several had come dangerously close to quitting during the hardest weeks. Kara stood before them in her service dress blues, preparing to present certificates. But before she could begin, Garrison stepped forward. Ma'am, permission to speak on behalf of the class. Kara nodded, curious about what he had planned. Garrison faced his fellow students before turning back to Kara. When we arrived here 8 weeks ago, most of us had opinions about you based on a video or stories we'd heard. Some of us, he glanced at Wolf, Boyle, Coulson, and Aldrich, had very personal and very wrong opinions based on our own catastrophic failures. The warehouse was completely silent. You didn't just teach us fighting techniques. You taught us what it means to be a warrior. That real strength is discipline, not aggression. That real courage is choosing restraint when you have the power to destroy. That real leadership is building others up rather than tearing them down. He paused, and Kara saw genuine emotion in his expression. Speaking for myself and my brothers here, you gave us a chance we didn't deserve. You could have let us face court-martial and dishonorable discharge. Instead, you showed us mercy, then pushed us to become worthy of that mercy. That's a debt we can never fully repay. Garrison came to attention and saluted. The other 34 students followed his lead, every one of them saluting in a gesture of respect that transcended regulations. Kara returned the salute, feeling something tight in her chest that might have been emotion if she allowed herself to acknowledge it. You don't owe me anything, she said quietly. You owe it to yourselves, to your teammates, and to the Americans who trust us to defend them. Take what you learned here and become the warriors your country needs. That's the only payment I want. After the ceremony, Bridger pulled her aside. The surveillance from Tuesday night gave us what we needed. Thornton and Volkov discussed specific classified operations, and we have it all recorded. Thornton was arrested this morning at 0100 hours. He's being held pending court-martial. Kara felt something release in her chest, a tension she hadn't fully acknowledged carrying. The contractors, their families will be notified today that the person responsible for the security breach has been identified. It won't bring them back, but justice is being served. Bridger extended his hand. Thank you, Commander, for everything. That evening, Kara drove back to Virginia Beach for the first time in 8 weeks. The city felt simultaneously familiar and foreign, like returning to a place you had left years ago rather than weeks. She went to the Iron Anchor just after sunset. Master Chief Marcus Oldfield looked up from behind the bar, and his weathered face broke into a genuine smile. The usual commander. Please, Chief. Kara took her regular booth back to the walleyes on the door. The whiskey arrived maker's mark, 2 fingers, no ice. Her father's drink connecting her to memories of better times. She had been sitting there for perhaps 20 minutes when the door opened and 5 Marines entered in civilian clothes. Wolf, Boyle, Garrison, Coulson, and Aldrich moving with the relaxed confidence of men who had survived hard training and emerged stronger. They spotted her immediately. After a brief consultation, Wolf approached the booth. "Ma'am, we ship out Monday for Afghanistan. We wanted to thank you properly before we deploy. May we join you?" Kara gestured to the empty seats. "Sit down. First round is on me." They ordered beers and spent the next hour talking about deployments, training, and the 1,000 small details that connected warriors across different eras. The conversation flowed easily now. All tension and anger completely gone, replaced by the kind of camaraderie that only came from shared struggle. Eventually, Coulson leaned forward, his expression serious. "Ma'am, what you taught us about discipline and choosing restraint when you have the power to destroy, I think that's going to matter more downrange than any fighting technique. Because the real enemy isn't always obvious and the real victories aren't always violent." "That's exactly right," Kara replied. "Anyone can pull a trigger. But wisdom is knowing when not to pull it. That separates warriors from killers." Garrison added, "We were so wrong about everything, about you, about what strength means, about what it takes to be a real warrior. We thought being tough meant being aggressive. You showed us it means being controlled. And disciplined," Wolf said, "and willing to show mercy when you could destroy someone." Kara looked at these 5 young men who had tried to kill her 2 months ago and felt something she hadn't expected: pride. Not in herself, but in them. They had taken the hardest lesson life could teach, the lesson that comes from catastrophic failure, and they had chosen to learn from it instead of being destroyed by it. "You're going to do good work downrange," she told them. "Trust your training, trust each other, and remember that the strongest warriors are the ones who can choose peace when war is possible." They raised their glasses in a toast. "To warriors," Wolf said. "To those who teach us," Garrison added. "To second chances," Coulson offered. "To Commander Brennan," Boyle said, "who gave us ours." They drank and Marcus Oldfield brought another round on the house. "Your father would have liked those boys," Oldfield said to Kara as he placed fresh drinks on the table. "Patrick always said the best warriors were the ones who learned from their mistakes." After the Marines left to prepare for their deployment, Kara remained in her booth finishing her whiskey slowly. Her phone buzzed with a message from Master Chief Stanton. "New assignment waiting when you're ready. High risk, long duration, full operational status. No media, no publicity, just the work. You've earned it. Interested?" Kara typed her reply without hesitation. "When do I start?" The response came within seconds. "Monday, RO 800. Welcome back to Operational Status, Commander." Kara finished her drink, left cash on the table with a generous tip, and walked out into the Virginia Beach night. Her father's truck was parked under a streetlight, and for just a moment, she could almost imagine him sitting in the passenger seat nodding approval. Real warriors proved themselves quietly. They taught the next generation. They served without seeking recognition. And when the mission called, they answered without hesitation. She climbed into the truck and drove toward whatever came next, toward a future defined not by viral videos or public attention, but by the work she did in places that didn't officially exist alongside warriors who would never be publicly recognized. The 2 contractors from North Africa would never come home, but the traitor who had betrayed them would face justice. The 5 Marines who had attacked her had become warriors worthy of the uniform. And somewhere in the darkness ahead, Americans slept safely because people like Kara Brennan had chosen to stand between them and the violence that never stopped coming. That was the only lesson that mattered. That was what her father had taught her. That was what she had passed on to the next generation. And as she drove through the night toward the naval base, toward the classified briefing that would send her to another battlefield, in another place that wouldn't appear on any official map, Kara Brennan allowed herself to feel something she hadn't felt in the 2 months since North Africa. Peace, not because the war was never over, but because she had honored her father's legacy, because she had shown mercy when she could have chosen destruction, because she had built warriors instead of just punishing enemies, because she had served without seeking recognition or reward. The truck's headlights cut through the darkness ahead, illuminating the road that led to whatever mission came next. Kara turned on the radio, and her father's favorite song, an old Johnny Cash tune about walking the line, filled the cab. She smiled and drove into the darkness, ready for whatever came next. Because that's what warriors